Imagine this scenario. It is 14 degrees Fahrenheit outside. That is minus 10 degrees Celsius. The air is so cold it feels like it is biting any exposed skin. You have no heater, no electricity, no roaring fireplace. All that stands between you and life-threatening hypothermia is a thin, fragile layer of nylon fabric. By all conventional logic, you should be freezing. Yet thousands of homeless people survive these exact conditions every single night without expensive survival gear. Why aren't they freezing to death? What do they know that the survival experts and high-end outdoor retailers aren't telling you? Today we are going to deconstruct the ingenious, often desperate, but incredibly effective physics of survival that exists on the streets. We are not just talking about staying alive. We are talking about how to manipulate thermodynamics with less than $20 in your pocket. Most people think survival is about having the thickest coat or the most expensive 0-degree sleeping bag. They are wrong. The real secret lies in understanding how heat actually moves and how to trap it using materials that most people consider trash. Let's start with a concept that homeowners pay thousands of dollars for, but you can replicate for pennies. It is the principle of the double-pane window. Have you ever noticed how a modern window doesn't feel freezing to the touch on the inside, even during a blizzard? That is because there is a gap of dead air trapped between two sheets of glass. Air, when it is not moving, is actually one of the best insulators on the planet. Homeless survivors figured out how to apply this to their shelters using what I call the Russian doll technique. Here's how it works, and the physics behind it is fascinating. You take a small, cheap, one-person tent. Then, you take a slightly larger family-sized tent. You do not just set them up next to each other, you stuff the small tent inside the big one. This creates a critical gap of dead air, roughly 6 to 12 inches wide, between the inner wall and the outer wall. This gap is your magic shield. You see, wind is a heat thief. In scientific terms, this is convection. When cold wind hits a single-wall tent, it physically strips the heat away from the fabric faster than you can generate it. But with the double tent setup, the wind only attacks the outer shell. The air inside that 6-inch gap stays relatively still. It acts as a thermal buffer zone. The outer tent takes the beating from the elements, while the inner tent, your living space, remains protected in a stable, insulated bubble. I learned this from a man named Marcus in Denver, who had survived 3 brutal winters sleeping outdoors. He didn't have a $300 mountaineering tent. He had 2 beat-up tents from a thrift store that cost him maybe $25 combined. Yet the temperature difference inside his setup was 15 to 20 degrees warmer than the outside air. Think about that. Just by arranging cheap fabric correctly, he created a microclimate warm enough to sleep without shivering, using absolutely no external heat source. If you cannot find 2 tents, don't worry. This principle is adaptable. A heavy-duty tarp suspended over your tent works almost as well, provided you leave that crucial air gap. Do not let the tarp touch the tent walls. If they touch, you create a thermal bridge, and the cold will transfer right through via conduction. You must maintain that floating layer of air. This is the exact technology used in 4-season expedition tents that cost upwards of $500, simply reverse-engineered with budget materials. But insulating the walls is only the first step. Here is the mistake that almost everyone makes, even experienced campers. They focus entirely on the walls and completely ignore the ceiling. This is a fatal error because of simple physics. Heat rises. All that precious body heat you are generating, your biological furnace, floats straight up. In a standard tent, it hits the thin nylon ceiling and passes right through into the freezing night sky. It is like trying to heat a house with the roof missing. This brings us to a $2 solution that changes the game entirely. It involves a piece of gear that was originally designed for NASA astronauts, but has become a staple of urban survival: the emergency Mylar blanket. You know, those crinkly silver sheets that look like giant candy wrappers. Most people use them wrong. They wrap themselves in it like a burrito, wake up soaked in sweat, and freeze. The correct way to use it is to create a radiant barrier on your ceiling. The science here is reflection. Your body emits heat as infrared radiation. A standard tent fabric absorbs very little of this, it just lets it pass through. But Mylar reflects up to 97% of that radiated heat. By hanging a sheet of Mylar from the inside ceiling of your tent, you create a heat mirror. As your body heat rises, instead of escaping into the atmosphere, it hits the shiny surface and bounces right back down onto you. The positioning is critical. The shiny side must face you. I learned this the hard way on a camping trip where I installed the blanket backward and spent 3 nights wondering why I was still cold. Do not make that mistake. Also, do not tape it directly against the tent fabric. Remember the air gap? You want to suspend the Mylar about 2 or 3 inches below the actual tent ceiling using safety pins, binder clips, or even duct tape. This allows air to flow behind it, which serves a dual purpose. Not only does this setup reflect heat, raising the internal temperature by another 10 to 15 degrees, but it also solves a nightmare problem that nobody talks about: condensation. When you sleep, you exhale moisture, about a liter of water vapor per night. In a freezing tent, that vapor hits the cold ceiling, turns into frost, and then melts when the sun comes up, raining down on your sleeping bag. Wet insulation is useless insulation. By hanging the Mylar liner, you create a vapor barrier that catches those drips before they can soak your critical gear. It is a simple, cheap modification that turns a $20 summer tent into a winter-capable shelter. Reflecting heat back down is only half the battle. In fact, if you only focus on the air around you, you are still in grave danger. Why? Because the real enemy isn't hovering above you. It is waiting silently underneath you. Here is the brutal physics of the ground. It acts like an infinite heat sink. Through a process called conduction, the frozen earth will drain warmth from your body 25 times faster than the air does. Let that sink in. 25 times. You could be wrapped in the most expensive down sleeping bag on the market, but if you are lying directly on the cold ground, your body weight compresses the insulation underneath you, rendering it useless. You are essentially lying on a block of ice that never stops feeding on your body heat. So, what is the solution when you cannot afford a $50 thermal camping pad? The answer lies in the recycling bin: cardboard. But you don't just throw a box down and call it a night. There is an engineering science to using cardboard correctly. If you look closely at a piece of cardboard, you will see those little wavy lines inside, the corrugation. Those are essentially hundreds of tiny tunnels trapping dead air. It is the same principle as the double wall tent, but miniaturized. To build a survival-grade mattress, you need specific types of cardboard. Experienced street survivors look for refrigerator or large appliance boxes. These are often double-walled and much thicker than standard shipping boxes. You need to stack them, creating a barrier 4 to 6 inches thick. But here is the next-level secret that most people miss: the cross-hatch technique. Do not just stack the layers in the same direction. Lay the first layer so the corrugation channels run north to south. Lay the next layer east to west. Repeat this alternating pattern. By doing this, you create a complex matrix of air pockets that creates incredible structural integrity and maximizes insulation value. In camping terms, this setup can achieve an R value, a measure of thermal resistance, that rivals high-end gear. However, there is a fatal flaw in this system that nobody warns you about: moisture. Your body sweats at night even when it's freezing. Cardboard acts like a sponge. If it gets wet, the air pockets collapse, and it becomes a cold, soggy mush that conducts heat away from you instead of trapping it. Sleeping on wet cardboard is worse than sleeping on the ground. The fix is simple but non-negotiable. You must place a waterproof barrier, a plastic sheet, a trash bag, or a tarp on top of your cardboard stack, right under your sleeping bag. This protects your insulation from your own body moisture. With this setup, you can raise the temperature of the surface you are sleeping on by 20 degrees compared to the frozen earth. That 20 degrees is the difference between a miserable night and a life-threatening one. Now that we have secured the environment, let's talk about the engine that powers this whole system: you. Your body is a biological furnace, but most people waste its fuel. The first trick is geometry. When you sleep, do not stretch out. Curl up into the fetal position. By tucking your knees to your chest, you reduce your exposed surface area by nearly 40%. You are turning yourself into a compact ball of heat, making it much easier for your body to maintain its core temperature. Then, there is the poor man's heater. This is a trick I learned from a veteran of the streets, and it is scientifically brilliant. Before bed, find a source of hot water. A gas station bathroom tap usually works. Fill a plastic bottle, seal it tight, Wrap it in a sock so it doesn't burn you, and place it between your legs right against your groin. It sounds uncomfortable, but here's why it works. Your femoral arteries, massive highways of blood, run right through that area. By heating the blood passing through these arteries, you are effectively warming your entire circulatory system. That warm blood then flows down to your toes and up to your core. It works faster and more efficiently than any hand warmer ever could. Speaking of circulation, never underestimate the power of a preheat. Getting into a cold sleeping bag when you are already shivering is a losing game. Your body has to burn precious calories just to warm up the bag. Instead, perform 5 minutes of vigorous exercise, jumping jacks or push-ups right before you crawl in. You want to get your heart rate up and generate internal heat, creating a warm microclimate the moment you zip up. You are jump-starting the furnace before the long, cold night begins. But even with a perfect shelter and a warm body, there is one more variable that can ruin everything in seconds if you get it wrong. It involves the wind, the direction you sleep, and a counterintuitive rule about ventilation that scares most people to death. You have built your fortress of air. You have insulated the ground. But nature has a way of finding the one weakness you ignored. That weakness is usually invisible until it hits you in the face. It starts with the wind. Most people set up their tent based on the view or the flattest patch of ground. In survival situations, this is a rookie mistake. You must become a meteorologist. You need to know exactly which direction the prevailing winter winds blow from. If you pitch your tent with the door facing the wind, you are essentially inflating a balloon with freezing air every time you unzip it. You want the smallest, most aerodynamic profile facing the wind. But experienced street survivors go a step further. They don't just rely on the tent's shape, they build fortifications. I once met a guy who scouted locations based solely on where he could build a wind shadow. He would position his tent behind concrete dumpsters, thick evergreen bushes, or brick walls. A solid barrier can reduce the wind chill factor by 10 degrees without you spending a dime. If you are in a snowy area, pile snow around the base of your tent. It sounds crazy to surround yourself with frozen water to stay warm, but snow contains millions of trapped air pockets. It acts as a natural insulator, sealing the gap between your tent fly and the ground, preventing the dreaded wind tunnel effect under your floor. Now let's talk about insulation materials that you won't find at an outdoor store. This is where it gets gritty and honestly, a little gross for some, but in a survival situation, dignity comes second to keeping your toes attached. Newspaper. Your grandparents might have stuffed it in wet shoes, but homeless survivors stuff it in their jackets. Why? Because crumpled newspaper creates a chaotic mesh of dead air pockets. It functions almost identically to high-end synthetic insulation found in puff jackets. If you are caught out without proper gear, stuffing crumpled dry newspaper between your base layer and your outer shell can literally save your life. It traps body heat against your skin just like that paper cup keeps your coffee hot. Then there is bubble wrap. Check the dumpsters behind shipping stores. This stuff is gold. The air trapped in those plastic bubbles is permanently sealed insulation. Laying down a few layers of bubble wrap under your sleeping pad adds a massive thermal boost. And styrofoam? If you find a broken cooler behind a fish market, grab it. Break it into flat chunks and layer them under your bedding. You are sleeping on pure industrial-grade insulation that costs absolutely nothing. But here's the twist that terrifies most people. You have done everything right. You are sealed in. You are warm. And that is exactly when you are in the most danger. Your biggest enemy isn't the cold outside. It is the water you are creating inside. Every breath you take releases moisture. You are basically a humidifier with legs. In a sealed tent, that warm moisture hits the freezing walls and turns into frost instantly. By morning, the inside of your tent looks like a freezer that hasn't been defrosted in years. Then the sun comes up. That frost melts. It rains down on you. Here is the rule that feels completely wrong. You must crack a vent open. Even when it is 10 degrees outside, you have to leave a small opening at the top of your tent. It feels counterintuitive, like opening a window during a blizzard. But you need that chimney effect to carry the moisture-laden air out before it condenses on your gear. Wet insulation loses 90% of its warming ability. 90%. You are better off being slightly cooler and dry than warm and wet. Some savvy survivors even collect those little do-not-eat silica gel packets from shoeboxes and toss a handful into the bottom of their sleeping bag to absorb ambient moisture. Finally, let's talk about fuel. And I don't mean propane, I mean food. Your body creates heat through metabolism, but not all calories are created equal. You want a slow burn. Eating a candy bar gives you a sugar spike and a crash, a flash in the pan. That won't help you at 3 a.m. when the temperature drops to its lowest point. The secret weapon of the homeless? Peanut butter. Fat metabolizes slowly. A few spoonfuls of peanut butter or a handful of nuts before bed is like putting a large, dense log on the fire. It provides a steady, consistent release of energy that keeps your internal furnace burning for 6 hours. My grandfather called this stoking the stove. And here is a warning that could save your life. Avoid alcohol. I know, a shot of whiskey makes you feel warm, your face flushes, your chest burns, but that is a lethal lie. Alcohol is a vasodilator. It widens your blood vessels, rushing warm blood from your core to your skin. You feel warm because you are literally radiating your vital core heat out into the freezing air. It is like opening all the doors of your house in winter because the heater made you sweat. It accelerates hypothermia. Instead, drink water. Dehydration thickens your blood. Thick blood circulates poorly to your fingers and toes, increasing the risk of frostbite. Keep your blood thin and moving. We have covered the shelter, the ground, the air, and the fuel, but there is one final piece of the puzzle. It involves a cheap piece of space-age technology that most people use completely wrong, and a dangerous game of Russian roulette that people play with portable heaters every winter. We have arrived at the most controversial piece of gear in the survival world, the emergency space blanket. Originally designed by NASA to keep satellites from overheating and astronauts from freezing, this $1 sheet of Mylar reflects 97% of radiated heat. That sounds perfect, right? But here's where most people mess up. They just throw the Mylar on top of their sleeping bag and call it a day. Or worse, they wrap themselves directly in it next to their skin. This is a mistake. Mylar is non-breathable. If it touches your skin, you will wake up drenched in sweat, which then freezes. The homeless pro tip is what I call the Mylar sandwich. You need 2 blankets. The first one goes underneath your sleeping pad or cardboard stack, with the shiny side facing up. This reflects the cold coming from the ground away from you and bounces any heat that escapes your body back up. The second blanket goes over your sleeping bag, but not tight. You drape it loosely or tuck it between the sleeping bag and a fleece liner. This captures the heat radiating from the bag and reflects it back inward, creating a convection loop. You are essentially baking yourself like a potato in foil, but without the moisture problem because your sleeping bag absorbs the humidity. Now, let's talk about heat sources. This is where the line between comfort and death gets very thin. Every winter, headlines pop up about people dying in tents because they brought a propane heater or a charcoal grill inside. Carbon monoxide is the silent assassin. It is colorless, odorless, and it puts you to sleep forever. Using a fuel-burning heater in a sealed tent is playing Russian roulette. So, what are the safe alternatives when body heat isn't enough? The first is the candle lantern. A simple candle inside a glass or metal housing can raise the temperature in a small tent by about 5 to 8 degrees. It creates a dry heat that helps combat moisture. It won't turn your tent into a sauna, but it takes the biting edge off the air. The second is the terracotta pot heater. This is a favorite among urban campers. You place a few tea light candles on a non-flammable base and invert a clay flower pot over them. Prop it up on rocks for airflow. The clay absorbs the thermal energy, stores it, and radiates it outward slowly. It acts like a mini masonry stove. Just be careful. The pot gets incredibly hot. And for your body, chemical hand warmers. But don't just hold them. Place them strategically. Put one in each sock near your toes, but not directly on skin, and one near your kidneys. These are high blood flow areas. Heating the blood here distributes warmth to the rest of the body faster. Finally, we need to talk about time. Survival isn't just about gear. It is about timing. The most dangerous time of the night is not midnight. It is between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. This is when the ambient temperature hits its absolute lowest point, and your body's metabolism slows down to its minimum to preserve energy during deep sleep. This is the death zone. Experienced outdoor sleepers have a protocol for this. First, the 3 a.m. bladder rule. If you have to pee, do it. Holding it in forces your body to burn precious calories, keeping that liquid warm. It sounds miserable to leave your warm cocoon, but your body temperature will rebound faster once that internal heat sink is gone. Use a pee bottle if you can't face the outside air. Second, many survivors set a silent alarm for 3 a.m. Not to wake up fully, but just enough to do a systems check. Wiggle your toes. Flex your fingers. Are they numb? If they are, it is time to do sit-ups in your sleeping bag or crack open those emergency peanut butter crackers. 30 seconds of awareness in the danger zone can save your toes from frostbite. But then, the sun rises, and this is the reward. When the first rays of sunlight hit your tent, something magical happens. The greenhouse effect kicks in. Even if it is still freezing outside, the temperature inside your tent can skyrocket by 30 degrees within an hour. The frost melts. The condensation dries. The danger passes. Survival out here isn't about fighting nature. It is about outsmarting the physics of heat loss. It is about realizing that a crumpled newspaper, a discarded appliance box, and a $1 piece of plastic can be more valuable than a $1,000 heater if you know how to use them. So, the next time you see a tent under a bridge in the dead of winter, don't just wonder how they are surviving. Respect the engineering. Because they are applying advanced thermodynamics in ways that most people will never understand.